Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today on February 21st, 2024. By the time you hear this, we may or may not be in Leap Day. We'll see, depending on when everything gets launched. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group and a research and advisory firm. And joining me today is my wonderful co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group as well. Cliff, welcome to the show. I know we've been talking about all the tea you've got to share. There's a lot of stuff going on, but it's kind of some deep stuff this week, right? Like it's a really, I don't know, is that what you call tea that's like really like strong? It's
That's
very
right.
well steeped, right?
It's steeping for a while. We spent some time in I would normally say green room, but I guess the tea room, right? On the veranda.
Yeah.
And enjoying and mulling over the various spices and deep notes. But I think the analogies stretch far enough.
Yes.
But yeah, definitely some interesting stuff. We're going to talk about AI. I know all of you were clamoring, not enough AI. We didn't talk about AI enough last week. Well, don't worry. We're talking about AI a lot, both in a sort of general sense. We're going to talk about some discussion from the OpenAI sort of kerfuffle from last month. The Dovetail has created some HR AI, right, capabilities, as has Dayforce, which we will remind you that was previously called Ceridian, but they're now Dayforce. That's for all the people that listen in every week. They already know that. Some AI-enabled, possibly at least reporting, an AI safety consortium from the Biden-Harris administration, and then finally some just general platform enhancements and new rollouts in payroll, both from Ramco and from HiBob. So that'll be really wonderful. And if we have time, I'd really like to talk about the conversation or continue the conversation you and I were having, bring the audience in just in this whole idea about AI, it's about journalism, the discussion article that we'll point you to. But I think it has a lot of implications for HR. And you, Stacey, had brought up some really wonderful points that hopefully we'll have time to chat about. So
Yes. And I know we have to be fairly honest with the audience that you basically cut me off. Cliff said no more topics because there were so many good things to talk about this week. So we'll do our best to keep it at the 30-minute mark. Cliff keeps telling me we keep running over. Our tea keeps flowing over, but we're going to get better at it. Also, I did want to let everybody know, just so that if you're kind of looking at places where you can connect up with us or maybe want to touch base with us in other ways. One is I'm going to be at the PlanSource Customer Advisory event, March 21st. I think it's going to be in Austin, Texas. I'll also be at the Workday Innovation Session and in April, and the Oracle Application Summit in April. So those are both going to be out in the West Coast in California and the Bay Area. So if you're at either of those locations and want to have a touch base, I'll be out there. I think, Cliff, you're getting ready to do a webinar with Iram on the keynotes on the same topics we covered in the keynote, right?
That's right. We'll have that webinar on March 20th. And so if you still want to see some of the overviews or need a refresher overview of our HR systems report, that will be on that day. And then, as always, you can reach out to any of us if you just have some questions and follow up from that.
Yeah. And I believe those IRM events, if you go to the website, I think it's www.ihrim.com or .org. I'm not sure. Now we'll put in the links for everyone, but I think those are open to everybody, right?
They are. Yeah.
Okay.
You just need to sign up, put your information in, and it'll be, like I said, overview of the key findings that you might have seen from HR Tech, but maybe you didn't get a chance to.
Well, not everybody did, right? Like it was not only were we on Friday, but it was also not everybody gets to go to the live events. And I know we've done a couple of sessions where we've covered the data from the SMB conversations we had, which is below organizations below 5,000. I think you're going to be covering the total keynote, which includes the data on the companies above 5,000 as well, which will be the first time we'll be doing that, I think, in a live broadcast. So it'll be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get a lot of that aggregate information.
And then the last thing is, if you're interested at all, we are getting ready at the end of March, beginning of April, to kick off our 6-month building an adaptable HR system strategy that works from concept to business case to outcomes program. It is a massive, immersive, cohort-based program. We have all the people we need from a cohort perspective right now, but we do have 2 or 3 slots open. If you still want to make that, let me know. Let anybody in the company know. You might see it in our newsletter. It's going to be a great program. We have a really great mix of participants already signed up to attend that event. And basically, it's going to walk you through building your HR system strategy from beginning to end, all the tools, all the technologies that are helpful to do that. It's vendor agnostic. It's going to be focused on both the processes and the approach that you take, but it'll also cover leadership development. And we're going to get into a little bit of that conversation this week, Cliff, why sort of culture, leadership development make a big difference in not just being able to get things accomplished in the organization, but also making sure they get adopted in ways that achieve business outcomes, right?
That's absolutely it. And actually, a wonderful segue, if you're ready to jump in to something that happened at leadership involving trust and transparency. This is a topic we had covered and, of course, had been a major news topic, which was when Sam Altman, if you recall, the head of the OpenAI, the ChatGPT organization, was removed and then was brought back. And Michael Bush, the CEO, Great Place to Work, which is one of UKG's companies now, had a wonderful article this week, really talking about some of the leadership behaviors that played a part in this whole kerfuffle, right? And a few of the things he pointed out were trust and transparency, right? And a lot of people felt blindsided, and that's why they demanded his return. They felt like they weren't being told the true story. And regardless of sort of right or wrong, it just shows the need for openness, right? Especially at a company called literally OpenAI, and having that ability to let people know what's going on for good or for worse. It really sort of highlights the importance of that.
Yeah, this one really caught my eye because I actually had a great opportunity to have a conversation with Michael Bush in December of last year, right before we all went on holiday break. We're hoping to maybe do a case study on some of the work that they're doing there, because it really is connected, I think, to what we're seeing in the research and in the data around what is the buyers are struggling with in some cases, that the technology and all the tools and all the processes around HR can be absolutely sort of top notch. They can have all the things, the bells, the whistles, the investments you put into the processes. But at a certain level, some of the issues come down to the culture of the organization, the willingness of the executives to make change, the trust that the employees have that putting their data in and sharing their personal needs and sharing their current work environments is going to be used in a way that's beneficial to them as well as to the company. And so what Great Places to Work is doing right now is they are focusing on creating a basic conversation about high trust workplaces. And I think this is an interesting shift, because I think for a long time we've been talking about engaging workplaces. Great places to work are engaging. And I think the engagement conversation has boiled over oftentimes into a focus on not just the technology and listening, but the process of sort of building environments that people feel are sort of engaging. But I think people forget how some of the really simple, basic issues mean so much more sometimes than the best benefits programs or the greatest approach to the environment from the technology, or the fact that you're being surveyed every couple of weeks. Just things like credibility, respect, and fairness. And OpenAI is a really good example of this, right? Now, it's interesting because I think what they struggled with was their board had a vision of what the ethics were that they as an organization were trying to drive towards, right? And Altman sort of had a different vision of what that looked like. And what it ended up being is they were going to lose their employees because their employees trusted Sam, right? The conversation had to be wrapped around the trust the employees had in that. environment. I had a similar conversation with one of my colleagues just recently around, we were talking about the idea of fairness. And it was in the context of sort of whether or not there was a need to provide maybe some support or some help in getting someone through a program versus someone else. And there was a strong reaction to the fact that you've got to create an environment where people feel like they know what the scoreboard is and what the performance ratings are and that they're all sort of being evaluated at the same level, right? And that's a tough conversation these days, right? Because that trust, that credibility, that respect and fairness oftentimes doesn't take into consideration the underlying challenges that people individually have. It has a real hard time with personalization, hyper-personalization, which we've been talking a lot about. Sometimes goes a little bit even in conflict with it, right? Because hyper-personalization is about me individually versus sort of that broader company and individual sort of trust conversation. But this is the balance all companies have to strike. They have to figure out a way to do it in this world. And to me, it was a really good conversation that Michael was sort of calling out on this one.
Yeah, I really like you brought up the whole concept of listening and surveying people, right? And he made a great point in there too, that it's not enough just to listen. That's very important, right? You can't skip that step. But if you don't do anything about it, his exact quote is, if you don't do anything, people aren't going to take the next survey, right? So you'll lose that opportunity to even listen. Something that we always think about when we're doing our survey, right, is that what are we doing with this information? As we've been developing our survey, which will be going out May 1st, all of you listening, please take part. But we think about, if we're not going to present this information, if this is not going to be useful to anyone, this is not a question we need to ask. And we go line by line on a very large survey and make sure that's the case. Is this something people can take action on? And it's a good practice for you to think about when you're developing anything, any of your policies and procedures, an HR person. You realize, of course, there's always going to be compliance issues, but anything that is sort of voluntary, anything you're doing that involves, as Stacey said, engagement, okay, that's good. You've got people there, they're listening, you've built that trust, but now take action. Right? That's always the next step. Otherwise, you'll lose that.
And make sure you're understanding their perception of fairness or their perception of respect. I think that's the harder part sometimes, because what's fair to one person might not be fair to another. You've really got to think about that. It requires more than cookie cutter is probably my most important thing that I got out of that from the conversation I had with Michael Wish is that we can't cookie cutter the conversation with people. We have to understand, be in the conversation with them and be aware of what is driving their perceptions in some cases, right? And then we can have a real outcome that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And speaking of taking action, I'm really stretching the segue here. Dovetail announced that they have a new AI-driven HR assistant, HR co-pilot. They released a video on their LinkedIn, also on their just main website, showing how it would work. One of the things that stood out to me, a lot of this was, I won't say cookie cutter. You just said that's now it's way. But, it's, what you would expect. I'm like to know my benefits. Now, it's one thing if you go in and type, what are the benefits? And it redirects you to the page that shows you what benefits are available. But what I liked was a term you used earlier, Stacey, hyper-personalization. That's what we're seeing here, at least in this example that they put out, where it says what benefits available to me, and it pops up with your benefits and the things that would be available to you. If you may have different things that are available or would be of interest to you, depending on your gender or where you stand in the company, that type of thing. And so that's what you will see along with what you have now. So it's not just, okay, we'll help you find that link. It's not a let me Google that for you. It really is working as an assistant as intended from AI. So I really liked seeing that aspect of it.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I mean, it's not like we've definitely saw a lot of these as we were doing the road shows last year, right? Various people putting in place. Some of them had them working. Some of them didn't have them working yet, right? These sort of assistants that were going to dive in and get the answer for you, right? I think that's not sort of the most unique thing about sort of what we're seeing from Dovetail. I think the thing that I liked about this, and we should probably note that Dovetail for the last, I want to say 6 years, but I'll have to go back and double check. But I know for at least 6 years, Dovetail, as long as we've been doing user experience and vendor satisfaction ratings on the help desk space. I should put it that way. It's probably a better way to put it. Which is now for us the HR service delivery space, because it's expanded out into this broader view that includes a lot of the engagement platforms and the portal technologies and things that go along with it. Dovetail has always ranked in the upper right corner for both the user experience and vendor satisfaction. And for the last several years, when we broke it out by size and range, they still got top user experience and vendor satisfaction rankings, even in different sort of size ranges of organizations. And they're not a huge company. They're smaller in the market. But I think what I've always found interesting about sort of when we will go look into sort of validating the data and looking at their comments is that their customers always feel like they go the extra mile in connecting the data and making sure that during that implementation, it's not just put it in and get half the information sort of lined up and go, that they really work hard to make sure that there's some business outcomes tied to that implementation. And they focus on that, and that the data that they get back from it helps them continue to do iterations of the investment. And so I think it's that process that kind of makes what you just talked about more valuable, because hyper-personalization requires that you connect a lot of different data points. And oftentimes that's not in a single system. And that's hard work. And if you don't have someone in your company who knows how to do it and your vendor doesn't help you do it, oftentimes those connections stay broken, right? And so even though the technology can do it, it isn't able to bring that information back.
Exactly. I think there's one other thing that I like seeing here of sort of an advancement over just the basics, in that any actions that were taking place while using this assistant, even within the demonstration they were showing, required human oversight, something that we talk about quite a bit too, which is I would like to, in this example they showed, donate 30 of my vacation hours to a colleague. And said, okay, are you sure? What's the colleague confirm? And then said, okay, someone from HR will be reaching out to confirm with you. So you kind of got the ball rolling, but at no point is it just completely taken over, which was interesting because one of the statistics that they quoted was that 92% of HR departments see value in using chatbots to guiding employees to information they need. I like that despite that, they said, okay, but it can't just be that, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and our data shows, I think we're at still just 16% in our data this year of organizations who have implemented chatbots specifically in the HR space, right?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that grows. Yeah, and that's always interesting too. It kind of brings us back to what we were talking before. It's one thing to have the information, it's the other thing to act on it, right? So 9 out of 10 people say, yeah, there's value. Well, would you do it? Well, no.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, because there's nervousness, there's fears, or it could be a cost. It could be a lot of different issues that hold people back. And I think part of that demonstration was meant to alleviate some of those concerns, saying, don't worry, everyone won't be running amok and messing with all of our records. It always will require human oversight, something we always love to see.
Which is important to HR. And that kind of leads into our next conversation, because the next conversation is about an organization that is trying to get more data into people's hands, but they're doing it through a bit of AI work, right?
Yeah. So Claro, we're assuming this is it, right? I'm not just showing off my 100-day Duolingo streak. Claro is this company that is an analytics organization, and fascinating stuff. Stacey, you'd sent this to me, but they had reached out as well. And they're AI-powered labor market reports. And we here at Sapient Insights Group love to check our data against any publicly available sources of data. And we have a large population of our survey takers that are US or at least North American based. And so we really like to be able to see, sort of benchmark our own data or get new data. But it can be difficult. If anyone's ever had to work in the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the US, my hat's off to you, because it can be difficult sometimes, right? And so having that ability to, as you said, do what we were just talking about. If I could just type in, hey, could you let me know how the unemployment rate has changed in 3-year increments, rather than having to literally download PDFs and all that sort of stuff. If that could be done, wonderful. Now, that being said, I have not actually tried using this yet, but I think they call it a game changer, and I believe it would be for those of us that need to work with those largely accessible data points. And so being able to get that sort of data from what need to be very large reports would be very helpful indeed.
Yeah, so first off, congratulations on your streak for Duolingo. Mine has never been very long, and I will say know that I have a lot of friends who comment on how good they are at Duolingo and still can't really say anything in the language. So
That's right.
But yeah, and I think that, so. Claro, if you told me correctly, the word itself means clear, right? Is that correct?
Clear, or of course, it's often used conversationally that way.
Yeah, and I always love looking at etymology of the naming that people put around companies, right, and where they come from, the backgrounds and stuff. For us, the sapient, meaning wisdom, was a big part of our conversation when we decided to be Sapient Insights Group. But I do think that I've talked for a long time about, if you're going to do workforce planning, one of the most impactful things beyond things like internal data around roles within the organization and position management, which we know already ties, and we've got correlations behind how important that is to sort of planning discussions. The other thing that often comes up when we look at our data as something that really adds bottom line value is external added data, whether that is external data on weather patterns or store data or maybe sales expectations or something like this, which is labor data. It's really powerful to have something to compare your own data to in a way that's going to be of value to what you're doing. But I think, to Cliff's point, again, we haven't gotten brief with this organization. It's on our list, but I wanted to bring it up today because I do think we're going to see more of this. I've seen a couple organizations, one that I had referenced last year at the HR Tech Conference, is one of the emerging technology companies to watch. I think is a company that does a similar kind of thing like this, but they're still have a process that they go through that's kind of manual to get that data in front of people. But the way they pull it is very AI driven, right? This, I think, from what I understood from the announcement, is that they're sort of also pulling it through but they're presenting it in a way that's a little bit more easy to use. Because that is always the struggle, right? Like, there's so much data, how you present it and how people can sort of ingest it becomes the harder part of this sometimes. And so, but I do think that this is, if you're looking at where you want to sort of do some innovation, do some testing, I would definitely make sure you put aside budgets or at least some time in your organization, if you do any level of workforce planning, to start to look at tools that do this kind of thing, not anyone in particular. But external data is going to be a big part, I think, of what will make these artificial intelligence conversations make more sense inside of our organizations, right?
Yeah, and that'll be another one that we have been asking in our survey, and we'll be monitoring again this year to see some changes. External data benchmarking, external data collection tools, because that's something we've seen growth. Again, it's a small percentage, but we suspect that it will continue to grow as people find the importance of what they can do with it.
Yeah.
To kind of keep that common thread going, right? What actions can you take place? What actions can you take with that information? So keeping on this AI train, it won't stop.
All day today, isn't it? Yeah.
I know, right? It's like the old days. It's back. It does prove the fact that I think we started saying it as early as around this time last year, that there are certain things you see as trends or fads or buzzwords, even just things that come up in HR, and you're, well, I don't know if this is really something I need to spend a whole lot of time thinking about. And I think we said last year, this is here to stay. And I think this kind of proves it, because here we are more than halfway through and we've just been talking about AI. But hey, the US government agrees, because the Biden-Harris administration announced their first ever consortium specifically about AI safety. So it'll be under the AI Safety Institute. It's a whole new thing. The NIST will have it all the way over, but we've now got a whole new acronym, because the US government never has enough acronyms. So the AI SIC, the AI Safety Institute Consortium, will be a group that has everything from academics to public office holders, industry researchers. They haven't reached out to us yet, but it's only a matter of time, I'm sure. And it will sort of be in charge of implementation, interpretation, and oversight of that executive order that we talked about a few months ago, the U.S. executive order on risk evaluation and sort of guidelines for the use or non-use of AI applications. So that's been wonderful, because we've been talking about sort of what are the benefits or potential dangers of AI all today. And now, we're finally getting some guidance here.
Yeah, it's good to see. I think it's expected. I don't think this is anything that we weren't expecting. I mean, right now it sounds like it's about 200, they call leading AI stakeholders is what they're calling it. So it's going to be 200 sort of different groups involved in this. I think the thing that's probably most important about this is that we are seeing organizations and businesses and governments and entities around the world take this a lot more seriously than they took when the web started growing. Now, I think there's two perspectives on that. Will this early leap into regulations cause a damper on the innovations that could go around this? And it might be. I mean, one of the things that grew the growth of the World Wide Web was that we didn't see a lot of early regulations. It kind of broadly swept across the market and broadly swept across the world before governments really sort of got their arms wrapped around it, which really led to a very open network for a very long time until things started getting regulated heavily. Same thing with social media. There was a lot more just letting it go and then regulating afterwards. We're not seeing that happen with AI. And we're hoping, and I think because we've been burned a few times, and sometimes that path of just letting it go and see what happens. So I'm a little bit more on the side in this particular case that we probably do need regulations earlier on, because I do think this is going to have an impact very quickly and very directly on people's lives. As we already know and watching what's happening in businesses, we're seeing a lot of organizations already make decisions about layoffs based off of the direction of moving into AI. We're already seeing organizations make hiring decisions, and we're already seeing organizations make promotion decisions tied to AI content. We really need to have, there was a great article that Anita Lundkin put out a few weeks back, if you didn't see it, on does AI need a human oversight, right? Like there was a whole conversation about, do you have to do a check-in on a regular basis to test your AI? And I've been saying for years that you should have a calibration and an audit process for any algorithm that's running, even just, and we should definitely have it for this, in my opinion, because the mistakes can be made at a much faster pace, and it's making decisions based off of the data that comes from humans, and humans aren't perfect. So I think this is a really important component. Whether or not the government will get it right is another conversation, but I think it needs to be here, right?
I do too. You mentioned a couple examples wherein maybe not having government oversight worked out, right? Because it led to more innovation. I think a counterexample, or an example showing where regulation might have been good, is if we think about the self-driving cars thing, right? Where we kind of waited and just the innovation happened, and we got quite literally burned by that, right? There was a lot of danger by letting that happen without oversight. So just as you as a listener are listening to that, remember that it's always a give and take. This is if we're going to really get in the weeds here, but this is the old sort of debate around copyright, strangely enough. Whereas if everyone has the access to information and can build on things, you'll get innovation. But then will you, because people won't feel incentivized to create something if it can't be theirs, or they can't in some way either get fame or money from their creations. So this is the push and pull also of regulation in all forms, right? You got to hit the brakes a little bit to keep that self-driving car issue there.
Yeah, and that's, it's important, right? Like I think, and maybe we jump to that last article because I do want to get to what's going on with Ramco and HiBob. I think both of them are important announcements, so maybe we'll wrap on that. But this idea of content and media and information sharing, it's going to be tightly connected to what's going on with AI. And there's, I think, a really great, there's a gentleman who's been in the journalism space for quite some time that I followed for a long time, who put out a really, I think, interesting connection between sort of the fact that journalism back when the websites and the World Wide Web was growing allowed the internet and the process of sort of making content more available on the internet sort of drive out the integrity in some cases and the hard work that we used to put into journalism, because you could just copy paste and get it out to everywhere, right? And AI, to some extent, we're seeing that happen a little bit too, in the sense that, well, it's just easy, so we're going to go with it. And the entities that put out the journalism are going with it just as fast as anyone else. But true journalism, true content creation, true deep thinking about the topics, deep conversations about the content, that's not replaceable. And I think that was the conversation he was having, which is if we do our job well, it's not replaceable, right?
Yeah, I would agree to a certain extent. I think he also, the gentleman's name, I think, is Adam Tinworth, not to be confused with William Tin Cup. Different person altogether, but shout out to both of them. But yeah, he's sort of setting a warning to, as this AI revolution is happening, let's not repeat the mistakes of the past. He really felt that by allowing, especially social media, which you had mentioned earlier, Stacey, as a big movement, we allowed a few companies to sort of consolidate and create these what are called walled gardens, right? Everything's really nice, but you can't leave, right?
Yep.
And so the information both in and out, right? Your posts can only go there and they'll decide what gets disseminated and how. And we mentioned as an example of one that we as a people sort of got right? By just RSS feeds are just that anyone can use whatever one they want. Anyone can make a podcast. I mean, anyone can make a podcast, even us. No, but they really did. We did a good job of that, of creating that. And you mentioned some of the new things that are coming out, Mastodon and Blue Sky, which I'm on now, which really help create these sort of federated platforms, right? They're all sorts of small independent states that can link up, right? And can keep it from being in the hands of just a few small players that monopolize that information. And so his sort of call to arms is, can we do this with journalism, right? Is this the space for this? But I think this is tied to a broader conversation that you just mentioned, which is this is true of just information, which I guess in a sense is what journalism is. But if you're thinking about this in a sense of how does this apply to my business, right? So here we are, we're bringing it full circle. It's not just information, but what can we do with it, right? And that idea of trust and transparency. How is information stored in your organization? Who has access to it? What are your policies on why are they that way? What would happen, right? If the person with the password is gone, who can access this sort of stuff? And I love this idea of just keeping it very open, adapt to just assuming that things are going to change. As you said, job roles can change, but if you go in with the right attitude, so sort of building on what you said, Stacey, about if we do it well, then we're safe. But also if we go in with the right mindset, right? Of I want people to know this information. This is important. This is important information to know. And if there is restrictions, being very sure of why that information is restricted. And HR lives in this world, right? So it's important to always re-examine how things work nowadays. If we think about that example of someone using self-service and chatbots to get information, they're doing some of that work and they need access to info to make the best possible decision. So is there any reason they shouldn't happen? Of course, there's going to be HIPAA restrictions and things like that, but it is time to examine what they should have access to and why and all of those sort of questions. So I love this very broad conversation because I think it sets the foundation for what we do at a more tactical day-to-day level, but it's important to lay that foundation so that we don't make those mistakes again.
Yeah, it opens up the conversation about flexibility because I think all of this conversation about AI can be so scary that it's easy to just lock it all down, to just say, we're going to have one place, one area, one voice. And that feels like the right way to do it because we're trying to keep everyone safe. But in all honesty, we might have better outcomes by being a little bit more open, but making sure there's guardrails in that open the way we're doing it, right? And so I think that was part of what caught me off of this was, yes, it's not going to be, our content may not be replaceable, but it's also important to remember that where it's housed and how it's housed is a big conversation too, right?
Yes. Yeah. I always joke that I seem to turn every single conversation into data governance, but I really think that's what we're really talking about. I think it's really important to think about. But I know you had mentioned a couple organizations that had some changes, some developments, some advancements that we wanted to mention. So I don't know if you want to talk at any length, but Ramco Systems, they're more well-known in India, but do have a fairly large presence here in the US. And they've launched Ramco Pace. Now, this is spelled Payce. This is another one where I'm assuming it's going to be pace as in kind of moving forward, like a walking pace. But for some reason, they've decided to join the long list of pay companies with the word pay in there, but it's PAYCE, and it is a platform-based payroll software. Anything, I know you had really looked into this, Stacey.
Yeah, I mean, I've done Ramco for a while, and we've done some briefings. And I will say I haven't had a briefing on this particular one. Sometimes we get this news and we just want to get it out to everyone. I think what's most important here is Ramco's got about 500 customers, I believe now, in their sort of HR space, got much more in their ERP and broader other applications that they run. But they've been very focused on sort of being very flexible. It's been a big thing that they've been focused on in their approach to sort of meeting customer needs. I think what they've done is they've replatformed, is my sense, based off of what I understand from the data that they've shared and the people that I've talked to. And in that replatforming, they've made their technology more efficient. They've made it sort of run faster. They're probably putting in a lot of more modern tools like the GUI interfaces, a lot of things that you'll see in other technology. But given the fact that they are in a region where I think the market's hot right now and people are really looking to automate payroll in a way they haven't probably traditionally, we're probably going to see a lot more of this kind of announcement coming out from organizations that are focused on either the European market or the Asia Pacific market. Not that Ramco doesn't cover other areas, but that is definitely one of their big focus areas. They say they cover about 150 countries with their platform. Now, that I do not believe is their payroll model. That they're not doing 150 countries in payroll, but they probably have employees who are on the system in those countries. And it sounds like they've invested a lot in on-demand reporting and guide implementation. But payroll is definitely the topic this month, right? We had a couple of announcements last week on payroll. I think the other big one that I thought was really worth mentioning is the HiBob announcement. HiBob did an acquisition of Pento. And Cliff, I know you had just a little bit of a chance to look at this, but HiBob for a long time has been probably the premier talent management solution, located really in sort of that Middle East region as far as servicing a lot of countries. They service a lot of US-based companies as well, very internationally focused. They're a great talent management tool for people who have a lot of employees in a lot of different regions and countries. They have a really big focus on their core HR system. Payroll has not been their central focus. And so this acquisition for them was pretty big, wasn't it?
It'll be big, and it'll allow them to kind of continue expanding what they're doing. I did look into this. This will be available for their UK customers first. So the HiBob UK group, you're getting this in 2024 with plans to expand it out further. Obviously, anything with payroll, every time you add a region, it just gets exponentially more difficult and complicated. But that is their plan so far, the roadmap going forward. And I know we're wrapping up here. I believe, we did mention that Dayforce will also be debuting their AI-backed assistant, or at least AI-backed sort of whatever you want to call it. That will be, I believe, the day before you as listeners will get this. So that's the hottest tea I think we've ever spilled.
Well, that's Sage is right there with that as well, right?
Yeah.
So Sage HR. So we've got two that are sort of launching basically in the next 2 weeks with the co-pilot conversation, right? And I think that basically is just going to show that this is going to be an expected piece in a lot of platforms. The question is this a piece of technology looking for a problem, or is it a problem that these pieces of technologies are fixing? I'm waiting to see how they're leveraging them inside these tools, right?
Yeah, much to consider. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Drop that thought on us right here at the end.
Yeah, I always do. I'm so good at that. But I'm excited to see these companies making these changes, right? I think Sage did a briefing. We'll have more updates on it in our next call, but I attended just briefly. And obviously there's a lot of focus for them on their finance side, but they're definitely sort of investing in this HR and AI conversation. And we know Dayforce has been for quite some time as well. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot more updates in the next couple of weeks from some of the other vendors in this space as well.
Absolutely. But yeah, I know it's been a lot of AI. I will mention too, even the payroll discussions, the payroll sort of platform enhancements or rollouts, even within those announcements, although we didn't mention it during the podcast, they mentioned some of their AI capabilities. So thank you all for listening to a very AI intensive episode, which I will mention, we did not have anything written or assisted by AI during the creation of this.
Not today. We have in the past for some abstracts. So we're definitely using AI, and we're definitely using AI for some of our data analysis and review in a closed environment very carefully. But AI we're reviewing it and figuring out how to use it just like everybody else should be. But I think the conversations are worth having, that you're looking at all sides of it. My big take one thing away from all of the conversations today is that you should have a calibration and a check-in process. That if I leave you with one thing today, what about you, Cliff?
Yeah, I think I'm getting used to this sort of transparency thing. That's why I mentioned, hey, we didn't use any, because some of the regulation may come when we have to say we did, or when we did, or if we did. We're seeing that already with image generation. So I'm preparing, and I like this idea of how we started, what Michael Bush was talking about with the sort of top of this podcast, beginning of this recording, that trust and transparency, just be open, right?
Well, on that note, my apologies, everyone, for we did not stay under the 30-minute mark. Cliff's going to, once again, tell me we went over. But as we wrap up today, I just want to say thank you to everyone for participating. As always, if any of the data points that we shared from the annual HR Systems Survey are of value to you, you can now download it off of our website. Please be sure to do that. It's in our Research Center Marketplace. Also, in that report, you'll see that we had covered over 200 HR vendors in this year's report and input over 5,000 HR practitioners. Just a side note, if you are interested in distributing the survey this year, those efforts have just started. We did our save the date email. You might have seen those if you're an association, vendor, big consulting firm, even an influencer who wants to have access to that report next year. One way to do that is to become one of our distributors in our distributor community. So that's an opportunity for you. And then also go to our website to sign up for our newsletter to get our ongoing updates on research launches. That insightful newsletter is the best way to keep in touch with us to find out where we'll be at and what we're doing. Things like launching our survey on May 1st for the public debut. Be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by CEO Terry Zipper. And if you like our podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to them. It makes a huge difference. We would love your comments, and we also love to hear anything you else want to hear us talk about. We do appreciate it when we get on the phone calls and people say, oh, I listened to you. So that makes both Cliff and I smile a bit when we're in conversation. So we do appreciate it. To stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram these days. Thanks to Cliff for pulling all of this together as usual and helping me figure out those great transitions between everything. Thanks to our production team, including Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by amazing founder Kelly. If you haven't seen, she started her own podcast about marketing efforts, and we'll put a link to that in our notes this week, because I do think it's a really amazing conversation about where the market is heading on a marketing level, and it's always good to understand how we reach people with conversations. Also, thank you to our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Summer Orlano. They make sure this gets out to you and everybody has access to it. Thanks to our listeners and our community. We couldn't do this without you, as it is absolutely necessary that you guys are enjoying the work that we're putting out. And I just want to say thank you to everyone. We hope that this has been just the tea you needed, and we are wrapping up for the day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.